Good morning and good afternoon. This is Kristen Schloss, and I'm from Razorleaf Corporation. I'd like to welcome you to the Razorleaf's Manufacturing Suite webinar series. This is our third webinar in the series, Streamlining Your Change Management Process. Today, we'll take a deep dive into Change Management Module for ARIS Innovator. I'm pleased to introduce our two speakers, Rodney Coffey, who is the Practice Manager for ARIS, Derek Meeting, who is our Engagement Director. Before I hand you off to Rodney, just a few housekeeping notes. First, the webinar will be recorded. We will be sharing this recording to all registrants. If one of your colleagues was unable to attend, we encourage you to share this recording. Also, during the webinar, we value your opinions and encourage questions. To ask a question, please enter on the GoToWebinar question panel at any time during this presentation. We will have a Q&A session at the conclusion of the presentation. So now I'm going to hand you over to Rodney.
Perfect, thanks, Kristen. So we're going to move forward in the Manufacturing Suite series, demo series today, and we're going to be talking about the Change Management Suite. So before we do that, just as a quick overview of what the Manufacturing Suite is. Next slide. What we've done here at Razorleaf is we've developed the Manufacturing Suite to be a collection of what I like to consider business applications that are extending or enhancing the ARIS platform. So you'll see in today's example, we will be discussing the Change Management module, which is definitely an extension of the previously provided out-of-the-box solution already in the platform. Just as sort of a recap, in our previous modules, we did an overview of all the different solutions that are available, as well as the supplier management module. And in future sessions, we'll be visiting the training management module. So with that, we'll dive into the change management module. Next slide. So what is the change management module? So the change management module is, as I mentioned, an extension of the out-of-the-box solutions. It really focuses around the engineering change order or the engineering change notice. That term gets used differently depending on your organization. There are features and subsets of the change management module that we're going to see today that also fall into DCOs, document change orders, or engineering change requests, all those different types of change processes. So I'd like everyone to come into this, especially seeing the demonstration today, take a look at the features, functionalities that are available, and know that that is extensible across your change management applications, whether you're a customer already using ARIS and has change processes, or whether you're just entering ARIS and just now adopting change management processes. Next slide. So these are the features that we have extended in the change management module for ARIS. So you'll see we have an affected item handling feature. Some of you on the line, I believe, are already ECO Toolkit customers from the past. So there's a little bit of history here. We had a tool probably for, I want to take the better part of 5 years, called ECO Toolkit. Just a standalone, really, feature that we were, the customers could purchase from us, and we would put in their environment. What this allowed was the easy manipulation of affected items on an ECO. So when you cancel an ECO, it could go in and remove all the affected items. It also allowed you to add affected items in a more easy fashion. And then for those of you who have specialty behaviors around the floating of an affected item, which is really how the revision control works to a change order and its parts and bombs, that is also a part of that enhancement. So I think it's probably been about 2.5 years ago when this was actually the first module of the Manufacturing Suite. We took the old ECO Toolkit and we started to extend on it to come with our change management module application. So that is where the other features we will see today come from, was part of that extensibility. I think we have a couple customers on the line to help us shape this. I'd like to thank them and all of you for the feedback that we've gotten over implementation. So all of these features are things that we had commonly seen requested during our implementations. And again, as I mentioned in the overview, the goal was to not only provide valuable business applications to our partners and our customers, but to also save costs, scale down the implementation effort. So having these things right out of the box, so to speak, in our modules will definitely help us do that. So the other things we're going to look at here, quick change. So we have a non-fit form function change that should not bump the revision on an affected item. Right? That's a pretty simple workflow addition we've added, so we'll get to see that in action. We also have the automated approval process and activity task assignment. So, for example, when I have a dedicated or predefined team that is responsible for the approval process, or a dedicated or predefined set of activities that have to happen as part of a workflow process, we've developed some structure, some framework as part of our application to better support that. We also have something that really borderlines change management as well as a parts and BOMs application with substitutes and alternates. So we'll get to see that in action today. And then I think one of the things that we've really seen be a pretty big process gap in the out-of-the-box solution that I really feel like we've done a good job of accommodating here is the prototype to production release cycle. So, you know, the way that we use this is, and the way that we see it is customers, as part of the early design process, need to release for prototype build or to get their suppliers an early version of the bill of material, even get the procurement department an early version of that bill. So think of the prototype 1, 2, 3, and then now we're ready to release to market. Now we're ready to manufacture. Now it's revision A, B, C. So this allows us to manage that early prototype process before we get into the production releases. Very good. We can go to the next slide. Just a click ahead of me. There we go. Good. So I kind of reviewed these at a high level. Just kind of recap before we get into demonstration here. Affected item handling, ability to add, remove, cancel. The floating, allow a new version to automatically replace an old version. Quick change, non-fit form function. I just spoke about the prototype to direction release cycle, the substitutes and alternates, how we deal with those in a bill of material. And then lastly here, the automated approval and activity assignment. So the demonstration will walk through each one of these things. You guys will get to take a look at these, and then of course at the end we'll take questions and answers. And you know, we again love your feedback as well. So next slide. So where are we really seeing the benefits of doing these things? So far I've kind of talked about the individual features and functionality. That's great for our technical audience on the call, but you know, how is this helping us? So really, you know, the main goal of managing a change process and wrapping that around your parts and BOMs is to accelerate the product release by reducing the number of ECOs processed. So what we're, you know, if we take a look at the affected item functionality, for example, that's going to make the creation and the management of engineering change orders in general much more efficient and allow us to keep the number of ECOs down. And then, of course, just by having a good change management process, that's going to help us accelerate the product release. Minimize the cost by reducing customization to your change management process. When I talk about minimizing costs here, we're talking about minimizing implementation costs. So again, each one of the features, the functionality that we've extended here on the platform, all come with a development cost in each and every project we do for our clients. So by having this standard technology, the standard offering to bring to you, we can do a couple things. We can reduce implementation costs. We can give you a better framework. So when you ask us, hey, what does everybody else do for change management? We've baked that into our product. Right? So we can show you and give you a good example to start from, which will also minimize discovery time. And lastly, just better support you. So we talked about this in the overview, but maybe not so much over the last couple of weeks. As part of the manufacturing suite purchase or any one of the modules, we're offering subscription support as part of that with Razorleaf. So if you implement this product, being able to better support you, get your requests for new features, evolve the product in a direction that makes sense for you, is a critical part of what we're doing here to minimize costs and support. And then enhance productivity by reducing effort and improve communication and collaboration by streamlining engineering processes. Again, these are these are things you're going to get by implementing change management in ARIS. by implementing the change management module from Razorleaf, we're just going to have more success doing so. Next slide. Perfect. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Derek. He is going to walk us through the technology. Like I said, afterward, we have a quick wrap up and then we'll take questions.
Perfect. All right, Rodney, you see my screen all right? You good? You got my screen, Rodney? Okay, perfect. All right, let's get started. Thank you very much. So as Rodney mentioned, let's go through and look at some of this change management functionality in action. I'm sitting in an Aris Innovator demo environment. Rodney mentioned the Razorleaf Manufacturing Suite. Remember last time we were together, we looked at supplier management. In the future, we'll look at change management. Today we're going to, or I'm sorry, training management. And today we're going to look at change management. We'll go through a couple different scenarios that should illustrate some of these features that Rodney talked about, and I'll point out some of those features, talk about some of the business value as we get through that. So the first one is this idea of prototype and production release processes. So we recognize that oftentimes a company wants to have a couple things that are different between prototype and production. One obvious one is revisions. We see a lot of times where a company will want to use something like numeric revisions during prototype or pre-production, and then during production, they'll use an alpha revision. May also have different workflows. Obviously, a change notice applied against the prototype is probably different than the workflow that gets applied during a production process. And so through the Razorleaf Change Management Suite, we've enabled that. So let's go through and do an example of one of those. I've got a cordless drill in our system that we've worked with in the past, and it's a pretty simple product. It's got a single level. There is one sub-assembly in there. We'll do some work inside that sub-assembly a little bit later, but we want to go through and release this thing to pre-production, to prototype. Start to work on it, but it's not ready for production. Now you'll notice that the revision is Rev 1. That's part of the Razorleaf Change Management Suite. So we've created a revision scheme that during the early phases, the prototype phases, is numeric, and then once it's released, it becomes alpha. So when a new part's created, of course, Aris applies a revision against it. In this case, we have it applying a numeric revision against it to start with. So we're going to kick off a new process here, and we've created a process called the Razorleaf Express ECO. We left the other processes that come out of the box inside of Aris Innovator alone. And we've created a new one that has a lot of these features that we're going to be talking about. Obviously, the name that you use would be whatever would make sense for your company, but the idea is that the out-of-the-box functionality is there, and then we run on top of that. So we're going to release this drill for prototype. When we choose the classification, the type of change that we're going to be doing, we've got a couple choices. We're looking at this idea here at the top, prototype in production. Next, we'll look at this quick change. But in this case, we want to release this to prototype. So we select prototype there. And then I'm going to go through and just select everything in the bill of material. And we're going to set it to release. As I mentioned, there is one sub-assembly in there. So we'll grab that as well. And we'll set that to release. And then you can see all of the items in the list have been flagged as needing to be released. And so I think that's everything that we need to do here. So we'll click the Done button, which of course then creates the workflow, attaches it to this process, and we can go through and move this thing through its process. Let's just take a quick look at what the workflow looks like. Now, our workflow in this case, we're using the same workflow chart for prototype and production. As I mentioned, they could be different. You'll see when I do a quick change, for example, that the workflow is actually different. It's much more simplified. But you could have a different workflow here. But in this case, the workflow is the same. We're sitting at the submit ECO stage. We're going to send it off to planning, who gets it scheduled with the appropriate people to get it released. Then it heads over to the drafting and engineering group to actually do the release. Then the change is done. So that's the process that we're going to go through. We're just going to zip right through it and show how that works. So of course, I'm going to submit this to planning. And when I do that, it's now sitting in the stage where we can go ahead and submit it to the people to start working on it. They get a copy of that change, and when they take a look at it, they notice that we've got everything flagged as revision 1. It's currently in the preliminary state. That's going to change in just a second. And we're releasing all these items, but of course, we're releasing them to prototype is what we're doing. So the last thing that we'll do is we'll complete our work. Everything looks good, so let's go ahead and close that change out. And when we do so, if we take a look, you'll notice that we've got these items released, but now instead of being in the preliminary state, we can see that they're in the prototype state. They're at revision 1. So all of the items, since I selected everything in this bill of material, everything is at Rev 1, everything is in the prototype state. We're actually going to go through and just take this one more time. So now that this thing is in prototype, we maybe want to make some changes. During prototype, we find some things that need to change. So the top level assembly needs to change a little bit. We found out that the keyless chuck and the chuck collar, they need to change as well. So let's revise those. And we had a problem with this plastic gear as well during the prototype phase. So we'll go ahead and change those also. So a couple things need to change. Once again, we're making some minor changes during the prototype stage. And then I select that this is a prototype change process. And we're all set there. So everything has now been kicked off. Once again, we're using that workflow that we looked at just a moment ago, and we'll send this through to the guys that are actually going to make the changes, which is the next step right after this. So now it's sitting with the group, the engineering drafting group, to actually make our changes. If we take a look at the impact matrix, we'll see that those new revisions have been created. Of course, only for the ones that I said I was going to change. So the top level assembly is now at a preliminary state in Rev 2. And then those components that I said I was going to change, those are at the preliminary state of Rev 2 as well. Everything else still stayed in that prototype state of Rev 1. That's out of the box functionality. The thing that we've added here is this idea that the states are prototype and the fact that we're using numeric revisions. So everything looks good here. Let's go ahead and complete this change. We would have went in and made our CAD changes and document changes that are required. Just a little note that I didn't point out, Rodney mentioned this during the introduction, but everything I'm doing here is against an item bill of material. This all works with files as well. So the same processes, the ability to have different rev schemes, different workflows could work for CAD files, could work for documents. Anything that has a revision process inside of Innovator could use the Razorleaf functionality that we're talking about. All right, so let's go ahead and complete this guy. And when we do that, we notice that we've got our revision 2 of our top level assembly. It, of course, is at a prototype state. So once again, we're looking at that Razorleaf Change Management Suite, taking care of the revision number for us, as well as the state. And if we look through the bill of material, we can see that we've got a couple things at Rev 2, a couple things still at Rev 1 from that first go around. Last thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and release this to production. Once it's all ready, we can take everything and send it all over to production. So the difference now is we're going to release the drill for production. And the change is instead of choosing it as a prototype change, we choose it as a production change. So what doing that does, it does a couple things. The first thing it does is it chooses the appropriate workflow. So again, we can have different workflow processes for each of the prototype, production, quick change. So it chooses the appropriate workflow. The other thing that it does is it's going to change the state as well as the revision. In this case, it's going to even change the revision scheme to move from a numeric revision scheme to an alpha revision scheme. So I've got everything selected. So in this case, everything's going to release. We're going to move it all up to, looks like I missed a couple things. Let me add those as well. We're going to move everything up to that released phase. And so everything has been selected. So I think we're all set. And we can go through and move this through the process. So let's take a look at submitting it to the planning folks. Once the planning folks are done, they'll submit it over to the guys to actually do the work. And once that happens, of course, this is the point where ARIS goes out and creates the new revisions and puts them at a preliminary state. So you'll notice that our Rev 2 jumped up to A. Our Rev 1 jumped up to A. Everything's at the preliminary state. It's going to change to released here in a second. But you're getting an idea now of what the change management suite's doing for us. It's allowing us, depending on the state of that item, to move stuff from one Rev scheme to another Rev scheme, from one Rev workflow process to a different Rev workflow process. So that's exactly what we want to do there. Let's take a look at our voting, and we'll close this change out. And when we close that change out, of course, everything now shows as it's released to production. If I look at that drill, we can see all of the components are at a production Rev. All of the states are in production. The drill itself is at a production Rev. If we take a look at the version history, we can see our couple prototype Revs. We can see our production Rev. And so we see how that process went. Of course, I could have this, not just 1, 2, it can go as high as it needs to, and then it jumps into the production state at that point, and now takes care of the production rev scheme and rev process at that point. So that's the prototype to production functionality that we've added to the system. Let's move on to the next thing, which we kind of looked at a little bit, which is that idea of the quick change. And so the quick change, here's the scenario. Rodney mentioned at the beginning that it's when we have a non-form fitter function change that we want to do, and we don't want to rev the part. We know that revving a part, moving something from rev A to rev B, that can sometimes, there can be a cost associated with that. I've been in organizations where if a supplier got a new copy of a drawing and it had a new rev, they wanted to requote it. You tell, well, nothing's changed, it's just a spelling correction. Well, it doesn't matter. We quoted rev A, and now you've given us rev B, we're going to requote it against rev B. Contractually, they're probably allowed to do that. There can be regulatory issues. If you have an agency that where there's an issue, there can be issues against the regulatory issues if we move something from one rev to another. So in this scenario, we may have the case where, whoops, hold on a second. I think I lost a connection. Give me just 1 second. We're connected to our Amazon server, and apparently it crashed on me a second. So I'll reconnect here. Just give me a second. But the idea is that there are cases when we want to make a change against a component, a change that's minor enough that it doesn't require a revision, and we want the ability to do that. Oh, Amazon is giving me fits. All right, hold on 1 second. I'm reconnecting. All right, let's see here. Okay, this should get us back connected. All right, sorry about that, guys. Looks like we're reconnected now. Okay, so in this case, if we look through this bill of material, we can see that we've got a little bit of a problem. There's a misspelling. This is a good example of what you might use a quick change for. So this gear here, this steel gear is got a misspelling against it. It's steel is spelled wrong. And so we need to fix that, but we don't want a rev to happen when we fix that. That's going to cause all the problems that we talked about before. So how do we go about doing that? How do we go about making a change without a rev happening? Well, let's go ahead and kick off a new process and add this item to that process, and we'll see that in action. So we're going to create a new Express ECO, and this is a spelling correction. And if I go in and look at my classifications, you can see that I've got a classification called quick change. And when I do a quick change, that allows me to do a couple things. A, it moves it down a bit of a fast path. We'll look at that in a second. And then B, it allows me to not have to rev the part. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and choose that I want to revise this part. And so it's set to revise. We've got the quick change. All that looks good. And if I take a look at the workflow, talked about this a second ago, you can see that we've got a fast path workflow that's happening here. The only thing we do is we send it to the guy to make the changes, and then he's complete. Again, this illustrates the idea that depending on the classification that we have, whether it's prototype, whether it's production, or in this case, quick change, we can have a different workflow that goes behind the scenes on that. All right, so that looks good. Let's go over to the sign-offs, send this over to the guy to make the change, and we'll start our work on it. All right, so we've started our work. If we look at the impact matrix, we can see that we've got Rev A out there. Well, wait a minute, that's strange. Shouldn't it be Rev B? This is the idea of the Razorleaf Change Management Suite. This is what it's doing for us, is it's moving it from Rev A to Rev A. So we're not going to update the Rev because it is, in fact, a quick change. Let's go in and make our correction. So we've made our spelling correction, and we're done with that. Again, Rev A, preliminary. So all that looks good. And we can go back to our change process itself and complete the process by voting it to the last step in the process. So we'll close the change out. And we are all set. If we take a look at our impact matrix, we can see that Rev A has now been released to production. And so we made our change. The spelling has been corrected, but we stayed at 𝑅EV-A. If I take a look at the version history, you'll notice that there's our couple pre-production versions from earlier, and then we have A, and A. Of course, the generation changes, that's internal to Innovator. It takes care of that for us. The point is we've maintained the same revision. So the ability to make a change to a part and have that, or an item or a document, and have that change be reflected in the record, but not affect the revision. And so there's a lot of reasons why we see people would want to do that in this case. This also nicely illustrates the next thing we want to show, which is the idea of being able to float a revision. So if I go back to my top level assembly where that steel gear was used, notice what I see here. You see the gear? It's the new one. Now it's hard to see because it's 𝑅EV-A, but you see that it's got the spelling correction. Now you probably know that out of the box, Innovator does not take new revs of parts and put them in the where used of the previous rev. It doesn't do that until you actually make a change to the parent. So the parent always shows parts that are superseded by the next rev. Now, of course, the next time you change the parent, that gets fixed, but a lot of people don't like to see that. They don't like the fact that when they look at a bill of material, they see items in that bill of material that are the wrong revision, that there's a newer rev out there. And so we, through the change management suite, do what we call float. We float that rev, that new rev, up to the where used of the previous rev, the where used of the previous rev part. So that's what we did here. We made a change. It caused, we can see the change here, and that change is now used in the same place that the previous rev was used at. And so that's a nice functionality that people like. Let's illustrate that even a little bit deeper. We'll go through and grab this gear case here, and we'll make a change to this gear case. If I take a look at the bill of material, we can see that it's got some high temp grease in it, and we want to make a change to this to change that high temp grease. Now the change that I'm making is fully backward compatible. There's nothing wrong with this grease. It works fine, but we've got new grease that works better. It's a silicone-based grease and it works better. And so any new drills that we're building, we want them to use the new gear case with the new grease. If someone replaces the gear case with the old rev, it's not the end of the world. So we want to change this gear case to 𝑅EV-B, and we want 𝑅EV-B to be used everywhere that 𝑅EV-A was used without having to rev the parents. And so let's go through and illustrate that. That's what we just saw with that spelling correction, but let's illustrate it with this gear case scenario. So we're going to replace the grease with silicone, and this is, of course, a production change. And the only thing that we need to rev is the gear case. Now, again, Innovator out of the box would want you to rev the top level assembly, as well as every other top level assembly but we're going to make a change. Again, the point is we're going to make a revision to the gear case. We don't want to rev the top level assembly. In this case, the gear case is only used in one place, but imagine it was a common component that was used in multiple top level assemblies. That could get pretty ugly to have to rev all of those top level assemblies. And so we don't want to do that. Although we do want the new gear case used in those new top level assemblies. So we'll see that in action. So let's see, make sure I got everything here. We've got that set to revise. We don't have the top level assembly set to revise. I think we are all set. And let's move this thing through its steps. All right, so we'll submit this to planning, and then we'll move it off to actually make our change to the gear. All right, so if we take a look at the impact matrix, we can see that the gear case has moved up to 𝑅EV-B. And we want to open up that 𝑅EV-B and make our change to the high temp grease. We're going to replace that high temp grease in here. Let's grab it out of here, and we'll do a replace. And let's search for grease. And so we've got some silicone-based grease. That's the grease we want to use, a newer part. So we'll throw that in there. So we've got that swapped out. All of that looks good. So we're done with our change to our assembly. Again, at this point is when you'd make your change to your CAD files or any other files that were involved and required a change. And if we go back over to here, 𝑅EV-B, preliminary, all of our changes are done. things look good. Let's go ahead and complete this change. So we'll close it out. And there we go. So everything's done. And if we take a look at our 𝑅EV-B, of course, it's now been released to production. And if we look at the bill of material, we see that it has the correct grease. So that's good. But now what about where 𝑅EV-B is used? Again, out of the box, 𝑅EV-B would not be used in the top level assembly. Instead, the top level assembly would show 𝑅EV-A, and it would show it was superseded. But if we go in with the change management suite in place and we take a look at the BOM structure, we'll notice that it is in fact using 𝑅EV-B gear case that has the new silicone-based grease inside of it. And so that's a real nice feature. A lot of our customers have asked for that because it can become very, two things happen. One, it's either very labor intensive to have to rev every top level assembly, or it's just ugly to look at to see that you've got assemblies with out of date components in them. And so the change management suite allows us to be able to put that in there. All right, let's look at another thing that we see happens a lot of times with our customers, and that is, what do you do when a change is in process and something happens and you need to cancel that change? We're actually going to look at this kind of from two different perspectives. So let me see. We'll grab, I'm looking for a controller that I've got in here. And let's see, down here at the bottom, it's this one. So we're going to make a change to this controller. Make a software change. There's a new version of software that we want to update this controller. So we're going to add it to a new ECO, and we're going to make a software change. And we'll do this as a production change, of course, because this is already released part, and we want to make a change just to the controller itself. Now, of course, using the float functionality we saw just a few minutes ago, when this change is done and it moves up to 𝑅EV-B, 𝑅EV-B is going to be used in the cordless drill also, because we're going to float that change up as well. So that looks good. Let's go through and do our sign-offs, and we can make our software change. So we'll hit submit to planning, and then we'll hit it to send it to the guys to actually do the work to it. And so when you do that, Innovator goes out and creates the new revs. So 𝑅EV-B has been created. It's at a preliminary state. We would go in and we would open up this item. Again, if there was CAD files or documents involved, we would begin to make our changes to those parts. In doing that, we find that we don't need to make the change. We were wrong. This change doesn't need to be made. Maybe it's already got the new version of software on it. If you take a look at the workflow, of course, a workflow has the ability to be canceled. This is out of the box functionality. We can cancel workflows early, but canceling a workflow once it's been set to the draft changes, you can't do that out of the box. So what would you do if you had a change process that was started and you've hit the draft change or even beyond draft change, and you want to cancel it? Well, you can't do it, so you have to just go through with the workflow and somehow flag and notate that this needed to be canceled, but you weren't able to cancel it. Well, that isn't good enough. We want to actually be able to cancel that. So the functionality that we've added is that we have the ability, keep in mind this is at 𝑅EV-B, started at 𝑅EV-A, we've moved it up to 𝑅EV-B. We've added the functionality that as part of the process, we can go through and cancel this change. Now, I've got the cancel change set at the draft changes path. You can put it wherever you want. At that point, and any point beyond that, you can put it. This is just where we have it in our example. So when I choose to cancel this change, if I go through and do that, we'll take a look at the impact matrix and notice that 𝑅EV-B actually got canceled. In fact, just to dig into what that looks like, if we look at the version history of this item, you can see that it was at 𝑅EV-1. Remember that when we were doing the prototype stuff. Went to 𝑅EV-A, then 𝑅EV-B. 𝑅EV-B got canceled, and now it's back to 𝑅EV-A. And so what we really did behind the scenes is we went and grabbed generation 2, we leapfrogged generation 3, and made it generation 4 𝑅EV-A. So whatever this one looked like here, Gen 2, whatever that looked like, is now where we're at. So any document, any file, any metadata changes that were made during this B state have now been pushed aside, and 𝑅EV-A Gen 4 is now the current item. So that's a huge functionality to be able to cancel a change when it's in process if you find out that the change was actually not needed. is something else can happen though, and that is what happens when we want to cancel not an entire change, but maybe cancel just parts of a change. So we find out that one of the affected items needs to be canceled, but not other parts of the affected items. So this is the last piece of functionality that we want to show. In the scenario in this case is that we are going to make a branding change to our product. And so that branding change is going to cause us to change maybe colors or logos wherever it's visible on the product. And so we're going to make a branding change. So update per our new branding. This is, of course, a production change. And the drill is going to change. So let's revise that. Our logo is displayed on the left side of the housing. So we'll go ahead and revise that as well. Oops, let me grab that and revise that as well. And also, oops, we don't want to revise that. And also, we want to go through and we've got some changes to be made in the battery. The battery has some branding on it, and the charger as well has branding on it. So we want to revise all of those items. So all of that looks good. Let's go ahead and say that we're done and send this through to make our changes to it. So submit it there. And we'll start the work on it. So if we take a look at our impact matrix, we can see, of course, that these have moved up to Rev B. That's what we expected. If we look down at the battery and the charger, they're Rev B as well. But as we dig into it, we find out that the battery and charger actually don't have the branding on it. The branding that they have is generic enough that they're fine. They don't need to be revised. So we could use the methodology we saw just a minute ago and cancel the whole change. But the problem is there are still parts of this change that do need to revise. And so what do we do? Well, let's go through and take the battery out, and we can actually make a change. We'll edit this ECO, and we'll say that we want to cancel this item. So not cancel the entire change, just cancel the action against this item. So similar to what you saw before when we canceled the entire change, remember we canceled the preliminary rev, but we're doing it on a line item basis. So we can cancel the entire change or just cancel a line item itself. The other thing that we can do is maybe we found that there was something in here, like, for example, possibly that there was a change that we wanted to make to one of the other components. The keyless chuck had some branding on it that we wanted to make a change to. So we can also go through and we can add items to an in-work change. So let's take this 549078. We'll grab that, and we're going to revise 549078. We'll throw that in the change as well. So now we're making a change to the keyless chuck. We can make our color or our branding change to that. We're going to make a change to the left side. We're going to make a change to the cordless drill itself, but we are not going to make changes to the items that we found did not need changes made to them. So we're good there, and all of that looks good. Let's go back over to our sign-offs and complete this change. So we would have, again, at this point, this is the point where we would have went in and actually opened up the CAD files, made the change, all of those sort of things that need to happen. And so we're all done. So we'll hit close change and send that on its way. Whoops, I think I got a problem because of my one I set to none up here. I think I messed that up. So I think we're all set. So when we send this on its way, it will complete the change. And then just like we saw before, if we take a look at one of these items and we look at the version history of these items, we'll notice that we've got this idea that we've got a preliminary rev that's going to be canceled. So you'll remember previously when we looked at our controller, we had our controller, and when we take a look at the history of our controller, we can see that we actually leapfrog over that rev, cancel it out, and move off to a different rev. And so the ability to not only cancel the change as a whole, but cancel line items within the change and even add new items to a change that's in work. And that's a huge thing, because what we find is that when people are in the middle of processing a change and they find during the process that something else needs added, putting it in a separate change is not ideal. That's what out of the box you would have to do, is just create a separate change, and that's not ideal. That can cause some confusion down the road. Not to mention it causes a new change, and there's a cost associated with creating new changes. And so being able to add those items in work to a running process is really some nice functionality. So hopefully you've seen some neat things that will benefit you in your innovator environment. Just to kind of quickly recap, we looked at the prototype to production revs, the ability to have a different workflow, a different rev scheme, whether you're in prototype or production. We looked at the quick change, which is the ability to do minor changes, like for example, spelling correction, without causing a rev to happen. We looked at the floating of a rev. So when a change happens to a component, that new rev is floated up to all of the where used of the previous rev, and that happens automatically. The ability to cancel a change as a whole, or cancel a line item of a change, and or cancel, add new items to a change. And so again, hopefully you've found some stuff that looks interesting, and we can help you with to enhance your change process within your ARIS environment. So I'll hand it back to you, Rodney.
Thanks, Derek. That was great. Very good. So before we take questions, I just wanted to, with this module in particular, as I mentioned, we had the ECO toolkit for quite some time. It evolved into this change management module, which was our first module as part of the change management suite. So just wanted to point a few things out that separate this from some of the other modules. We do have probably about 15 customers using the change management module functionality today. A few of those on the new, some on the ECO toolkit still preparing to migrate to the change management module, and then a handful on the change management module itself. So a lot of the stuff here has been tried, tested, and we are actively gathering feedback to enhance this. I think, again, I talked a little bit about roadmap and some of the things related to each module in each one of these sessions. A big area that we're focused on in the future for this, later this year, next, is the reporting and the metrics that come out of the change management module. When we think about, one of the big challenges in PLM is properly measuring ROI and how customers see success with this. I think in this area in particular, we can write some pretty great reports that help customers capture what that ROI is. So closure of ECOs, the length of an ECO from getting to end, how many of the change orders roll up to quality incidents, and then just tracking as a business how many change orders we have open, closed, and in what state they're in. So some really great things come in there. We're currently implementing these products across our entire customer base. So, you know, many of you are familiar with the fact on the call that Razorleaf supports PLM across the ARIS and a number of other applications, as well as helping customers through product selection and working through just general process building. So we're taking all things into account when we're developing these solutions. So we get a lot of great ideas from every corner of our business to help make this product better. And then again, I just want to reemphasize that if you're looking at implementation, if you are, there's really two types of customers that we have with this. We have existing customers that are already on the platform and looking to piece this out, kind of take pieces of the functionality and roll it into existing processes. And then we have those net new customers who have never implemented change management. If you are one of those net new customers, this is a great way to simplify your implementation. So if you're just now kind of going through product selection, looking at ARIS, I would highly recommend you take a look at the suite. That's a great way to not only get a great baseline for what change management should look like, but also save yourself implementation dollars having to do custom development. So just a couple things I wanted to talk about before we got to questions. So I think with that, we can kick it over to the next slide and open it up for Q&A.
Thank you, Rodney. Let's get started with some Q&A. It looks like we have a couple questions here. So just a reminder, any questions, please enter it into the question panel. The first one is from Angela. And it's, sorry about that, I lost. Does your change management suite only address the Express ECO or other CM processes as well?
No, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, we really have two different customers that come at this, that we position the suite for. When you buy any of the modules, you're going to get that module installed in your environment as it is, and then we can take it and we can part it out, or we can create a separate instance of that module. It's something that's going to show up in the table of contents, and then break it out into individual processes. So while we use the Express ECO as kind of the starting place and how we extended it, we have a bunch of customers who have, for example, wanted the float from the ECO, the float from the change management module, or the quick change from the change management module, and we've plugged that into other change processes. So remember what I said earlier, document change, DCO, ECO, ECR, even some custom. We have a customer that has a PCO, which is a custom part change order process. Any of the functionality that you saw Derek walk through can be plugged into any one of those change modules, not just an extensive extensibility on the ECO, Express ECO.
Perfect. Thank you, Rodney. The next question is, it looks like you have changed the standard part life cycle. Does this conflict to any other ERA CM processes that directly trigger the part life cycle? Example, can I still make a simple MCO on a part with a state prototype?
I can comment on this. So one of the things that we really took care of in the development process, so when we started to get into development of these different business applications, and again, this applies for the change management module and the other modules, we knew that whatever we developed had to play well with what else was there out of the box. So if the existing change process tied into MCO, tied into part, even our own new applications such as supply management, we are testing. When we go through our evaluation of the software we're building, we go through and test to make sure that it still sits beside, works with the other technology out of the box well. So anything, if you have an existing Express ECO, anything that is available, attached, related to that process should also work with the change management module. That is something I have a pretty close eye on.
Great, thank you. The next question is regarding cancel. Is it also possible to completely remove the newly created revisions and roll back the changes completely?
Could you say that one more time?
Sure. Regarding cancel, is it also possible to completely remove the newly created revisions and roll back the changes completely?
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. I think that might be inherent to what it does, actually.
So, Rodney, I'll add on to that. You know, that is possible to do that. I think that I would want to have a conversation about whether that's what we would want to do. I mean, kind of one of the tenets of a PLM system is that it tracks the changes that you make. And so, you know, if changes were made, even though you want to kind of hide that because you accidentally made the changes, you know, it's maybe not the greatest thing to do. So it's not something that we've got as like a configuration switch that you can just say, oh, do it this way. It can be done. In fact, I think at one early iteration of the product, we actually did it that way. We've since changed because we think having that history of the fact that it was canceled is important.
Yeah, now that you're describing, yeah, a couple of accounts come to mind where that feels like an area where we always have the conversation, and then we find that we're addressing the 20% and not the 80% of what needs to happen. So I think in that case, we would want to chat about the specific use case, because something like that could have a pretty big impact. Yep.
Great, thanks, Rodney and Derek. It looks like we've got about 8 minutes to the hour, so I'm just going to ask one more question here. Can you implement the change management module with an existing change process?
Yes. So I want to, very good, I'll take this. So again, when you purchase the change management module or any of the modules, you're going to get a talk item, and we like to give that to you and leave it there so that you have a base for whatever we released. That's kind of a benchmark, if you will. And then if you have existing change processes, and like I said earlier, if you just want to peel out certain feature sets, let's say you wanted to take the quick change process or the prototype process and apply it to a number of different change processes, then what we typically do is we'll do a services project along with the module, and we'll start to peel those features out and implement them throughout the other change processes you have. So a perfect example is we have a pretty long time customer of 𝙤𝙊𝙍𝙍𝙍. They came to us at the beginning of last year and wanted just that. There were, say, 5 out of 7 different features of the tool that they wanted to implement into existing processes. We did just that. We gave them our off-the-shelf solution, and then we split it out and did some customization with it to plug it into those other modules. And they're still supported as part of the subscription offering that comes with those. They're also still getting additional features that are released.
Great, thank you, Rodney. This covers our Q&A session. If there was any questions that we did not answer today, we will ensure that we get back to you as soon as possible. And Rodney, did you have any closing remarks?
Yes, so we have 1 session left. We're 3 out of 4 for what we planned for this demo series. I would just encourage everybody to come. We're pretty excited about showing the training management module next. I think that is one that, while supplier management and change management are extensions of what's built on the platform, training management is definitely its own solution. So a brand new business application that's on there. I'd love to see everybody attend that. And just, again, if you can go to the next slide, Kristen, we are actively looking for new requests, new things like this that you would like to see. So, please feel free to reach out to myself if you're interested in any of the suites, or if you just have ideas on how we can make things better. And then obviously we have our 𝙤𝙊 community at razorleaf.com. That goes to myself as well as our product group, also capturing ideas, things to help make the product better. So like I said, things that we are actively working on in our roadmap for all the modules is reporting and business metrics, because again, we want to help our customers better see the ROI that's being reached with PLM. But we are currently building a business application roadmap to the future. We want to hear what your problems are so that we can help solve them. So please take advantage of those in the future. And I think for today, that's all I have. Thank you, Derek, so much for the technical demonstration. I think you did an excellent job, and Kristen for moderating. We hope to see you guys at the next class, next demo.
Thanks, Rodney, and thanks, Derek. This concludes our webinar for today. And I know we had a few technology glitches, and those will be fixed in the recording. And we look forward to seeing you at our final webinar, Track and Manage the Employee Training Process, on Wednesday, June 17th at 12 o'clock. And we do appreciate your time and participation today. And thank you, and stay healthy.